presentation, and then we'll also have want to have time for questions from you all. So this is a session where we are talking about Rusty Patch Bumblebee and how to deal with that with the Bee Atlas surveys. So some of you may have some portion of your grid cell that has some aphanus in it, or potential to have aphanus there. So we just want to make sure that everybody is on the same page with knowing what to do regarding Rusty Patch Bumblebees, since they are a federally protected species. So I'm assuming the slides are showing all right.
Yes.
So Elaine Evans. Been dealing with these bumblebee atlases in Minnesota for a few years now. So I'm an extension educator here, focusing on pollinator conversation, and I'm presenting this with Elise. I'll let you introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Elise Bernstein. I'm one of the outreach and education specialists with the Bee Squad, which is the education and outreach arm of the Bee Lab at the University of Minnesota. And then I'm the program coordinator for the Minnesota Bumblebee Atlas.
All right. So here we have the outline. We're going to just cover some general Rusty Patch information, what to do if you find them, and also go over some ID and how to tell them apart from other things that other bumblebees that may look similar. So I'm assuming that you're here because you have adopted a grid, and if you're thinking about adopting a grid, we're always happy to have more grids adopted. We do have these priorities. For these purple ones are ones where we for sure need more survey work, and then we do have some of these grids where we have some coverage with these potential zones for the Rusty Patch Bumblebee, and those are ones where you do need some special information about what to do, which is what we're going to go over now. So Rusty Patch Bumblebee is federally listed as endangered. So it was listed in 2017. There is a whole recovery plan that's been formed from them, but they are populations are low. They are at risk of extinction. But we do commonly see them, especially in southeast Minnesota, here and there, kind of patchy spots where they can be regularly found. But because they have this federal protection, they are protected from harm, and special care is needed if you're in areas where we suspect that they might be, based on past sightings. And here in Minnesota, it is also our Minnesota State Bee. We have a Rusty Patch Bumblebee license plate. A couple years ago, they even had Rusty Patch Bumblebee lottery tickets. So with going over how to be careful if you do, if you are in one of these areas, or have one of those grids where there may be some Rusty Patch Bumblebees in some corner there. We're asking you to not collect in those areas, but there's lots of great information we can get from areas near there. They are more likely to be found there, but until we find them, we don't know that they're there. So we just want you to keep your eyes out for them, looking for them while you do collect. And with the methods we have, you're putting bees into cups, getting them on ice, and then if while you're doing that, you suspect that one of the bees you have might be a Rusty Patch Bumblebee, we ask you to pause your survey. So pause your timer that you have. Make sure you get a good look at the bee and identify it. If it is a Rusty Patch Bumblebee, we ask you to photograph it. You can depending on the kind of containers you have, usually as long as it's a clear container, you can manage to photograph through the container. If you're having problems with that, it's okay for you to chill them out for a few minutes till they slow down if you do need to take a photo outside of a vial. But we do want to make sure that you get a good photo of the bee, and making sure that you're showing the ID characters, which we'll go over, and then release that bee as soon as you can if it is a rusty patch bumblebee. So if it is indeed a rusty patch bumblebee, you can go ahead and complete your survey at that location that day. But just if you do see more rusty patches while you're out, try to avoid collecting and handling them. If you do see more, it'd be great for you to just note if you do see more. You do need to let us know as soon as possible. We need to report that to the Fish and Wildlife Service as soon as we can. I think officially we have a week to do so after we've sighted them in a new location. So just as soon as you can, get those photos to me or to the Minnesota Bumblebee Atlas email address, along with the location. So if you can give the latitude, longitude of where you were, that is best for us. And then on your next survey, since we have verified that rusty patch bumblebee are in that location, we do prefer that you go to a new location. So that, we're basing a lot of these things off these maps from the Fish and Wildlife Service. They only get updated once a year. So that new point that you had will be part of the new map that comes out next spring. But since we know that that really has turned into one of these red zones on the map, we prefer that you find a different location within your grid. And theoretically, if it's nearby and in the grid, we could even get more locations and get those out. What we want to do is really know every place that we are, so we can best have recovery efforts. So I do see just a question from Heidi. I'll just go ahead and do this before we switch over to Elise for some ID stuff. So Heidi says, I have grid 38 and I don't see the red area in mine. I was looking this morning and I couldn't find a map with the red area in my grid. Is this map up to date? So I did just update, actually just yesterday, I updated our map that we have on the Minnesota Bumblebee Atlas website, because the Fish and Wildlife Service did update again just at the end of May, May 30th. So really recently. And so there may be some updates there. If you are looking at the oh, sorry. I just have to exclude my cat from this room. The map that we have currently on the Minnesota BS Atlas website is the one that's up to date. So you may have had a red zone. It may have gotten removed. There were some spots where that happened. And I'm going to hand things over to Elise to go over some of these ID.
Awesome. Thank you. So when we are taking a look for our rusty patch bumblebees, there's a few key characters that we want to be keeping a specific eye out for. So we'll start with the thorax. On the back of the thorax, right between the wing bases, the rusty patch has sort of an umbrella shape or a thumbtack shape. It's kind of what you're seeing there, that top red arrow is pointing to. And then on their abdomen, we're also looking out for that rusty patch. So the first abdominal segment on the rusty patch, T1, is all yellow. And then on T2, there's that little brown rusty swoop kind of in the middle with yellow underneath it. So I kind of like to think of it like the rusty patch is sort of sandwiched in there in the yellow that we're seeing on T1 and T2. And the males are also similar. They have a similar color pattern to the females. So when we're trying to figure out if it's rusty patch or not, we don't have to worry about a difference in color between the males and the females. Next slide, please.
Nope.
All right, so here's just a couple images of Rusty Patch Bumblebee from a few different angles. So on the left, this image pretty clearly shows that thumbtack or umbrella shape between the wing bases on the thorax. We've got that black band that stretches across with a little bit of black moving down towards the abdomen, and then a really, really clear rusty patch. It's important to note in this image that T1 is fairly small. There's just a little, it's a lot thinner than the band on T2. So it looks like there's just a little bit of yellow before we're seeing that rusty patch that's sandwiched in there in the yellow on T1 and T2. In our image of the rusty patch on the right, it's a little bit harder because it's at a bit of a different angle, but we still can see the rusty patch on T2 there, but it's a lot lighter in color. They're not always so distinct. So that's also really important to keep in mind. Next slide, please. Here's another really awesome, very clear, distinct photo of a rusty patch bumblebee. She's also doing something that's kind of characteristic of rusty patch, where she's nectar robbing in this flower. So she's poking holes towards the base of the flower rather than going in at the top where the pollen is. But we can again really clearly see that umbrella or thumbtack shape on her thorax, really clear black band between the wing bases. The base of the umbrella or the thumbtack is a little bit less distinct, but we still see that there with those black hairs. Then T1, the yellow on T1 is a little bit more distinct in this photo, and that rusty patch, the brown rusty band, is really, really distinct. It really stands out here, so we can really see where that sits between those two little bits of yellow. Next slide. So there are a lot of species that are commonly mistaken for rusty patch bumblebees, one of which being the brown-belted bumblebee, or Bombus griseocolus, which is in the big three bumblebees. This is one of the most common bumblebees we see here, especially in the Twin Cities. I know about 80% of all the bumblebees that we're seeing are the big three. So it's important to know how to tell the difference between the brown-belted and the rusty patch. So we're primarily looking at the abdomen here for the key characters of the brown-belted bumblebee. The first abdominal segment, so T1 on the brown-belted, is all yellow, just like rusty patch, but T2 is where we see differences. So here for the brown-belted bumblebee, there's just that brown or orangish swoop or crescent shape on T2, or the second abdominal segment, but there's not yellow surrounding it. We can still see black on either side of that brown crescent. So there's black on the edges of that second abdominal segment. If we also look at the thorax, there's just a black sort of spot of hairs between the wing bases. We're not seeing that clearer, distinct umbrella shape. And the males are also similar in color pattern. They have the same color pattern on their abdomens, with the first abdominal segment being yellow, followed by that brown or orangish crescent shape with black on either side, but they have really large eyes. Next slide, please. So here's a good photo of the brown-belted bumblebee. We know this is a female because she's got those really big globs of that orange pollen on her hind legs. But if we're taking a look at her abdomen here, we can see that first abdominal segment is all yellow. It's kind of a deep, rich shade of yellow, so paying attention to kind of the colors of yellow on these bumblebees is also important. But then when we look at T2, we're seeing black on the sides before we see that brown crescent or swoop there in the middle. And remember, with rusty patch, the brown crescent is kind of sandwiched in between yellow that we see on both T1 and T2. So noting the black on the sides here is really important to distinguish brown-belted bumblebee. Next slide. So this next bee that's often mistaken for rusty patch is Bombus ternarius, or the tricolored bumblebee. And this is one of the most common bumblebees in the northern half of the state. So we often hear people say, oh, there's rusty patch bumblebee everywhere in northern Minnesota, but it's actually just the tricolored bumblebee because they have fairly similar characteristics. So they also have that on their thorax, a similar shaped umbrella or thumbtack kind of band, but it's a little bit thicker than what you see on rusty patch. When we see an actual photo of this bee, that'll be a little bit easier to tell the difference in shape. And then rather than having a crescent or swoop of brown rusty hairs on T2, the second and third, so T2 and T3, the abdominal segments on the tricolored bumblebee are a bright orange or a bright red in color. So they stand out a lot. So we have yellow, and then we've got two segments of that red or orangish, and then yellow. And the males are also similar. Next slide. So this really shows the difference in the size of that black umbrella-shaped band on the thorax between the wing bases. So it's a lot wider and a lot thicker than what we see on rusty patch. And in this bee in particular, those two abdominal segments, T2 and T3, are very distinct. They're very orange, really standing out. So there's a lot more color on this bee than we see on rusty patch. And then here's another example of a tricolored bumblebee where T2 and T3 are a little bit less distinct. So we still see that umbrella-shaped band on the thorax, but we still know that it's the tricolored and not rusty patch because the band is so thick. And then when we're looking at the abdomen, T2 and T3 are still orange. It's just faded a little bit and not as distinctly bright orange. Another bee that is also sometimes mistaken for rusty patch is Bombus vagans, or the half-black bumblebee. And this is often with the queens. So our rusty patch queens actually don't have the rusty patch in most cases, or the thumbtack shape. They just have their first two abdominal segments are yellow, which is the distinguishing characteristic of Bombus vagans, or the half-black bumblebee. So there's just that one small patch of black hairs between the wing bases, and then T1 and T2, the first two abdominal segments are yellow, and the males are similar with this one. And another thing that's important to note with Bombus vagans, or the half-black bumblebee, is kind of the appearance of the hairs. So these are a really shaggy bumblebee. You can kind of tell, especially in that photo on the left, the way that their hairs are sort of shaggy. And that's not something that is necessarily characteristic of the rusty patch. But here we just see those first two abdominal segments are clearly very yellow. We're not seeing any evidence of any sort of rusty patch or anything like that.
And one thing I'll just add in with vegans is IDing from photos. It can be tricky where you can kind of see it a little bit on this one on the right, just on the side here, where those hairs look kind of darker as opposed to the rest of the yellow, but that's just kind of, you're just kind of seeing through to the cuticle. And so sometimes even it'll be just in that exact spot where a rusty patch would be, in that middle of that second abdominal segment, it'll look darker. And yeah, so it can be tricky. Just Bombus vagans can also be pretty common, especially up north. Just making sure with the photos that we can kind of clearly see what's try to be careful with lighting for some of these, so we can, when we're going through an IDing, we can make sure that what we're seeing is the color of the hair and not just a shadow.
All right, so another bee that also is sometimes mistaken for rusty patch is the red-belted bumblebee, or Bombus rufosinctus. And Bombus rufosinctus has a lot of different variations in their color pattern. But they have a pretty distinct band of black hairs between the wing bases. Because of its shape, we kind of refer to it as the Eye of Sauron, if you're familiar with Lord of the Rings. But that's something that distinguishes the red-belted bumblebee from the rusty patch. And on the abdomen, the Bombus rufosinctus, or the red-belted, always has the first abdominal segment yellow, and then the second one usually or always has a sort of yellow crescent shape. The hairs are sort of in a crescent shape, which is then followed by either black or red. So the reddish ones are sometimes the ones that are more commonly mistaken for rusty patch bumblebee. People see the red or orangish color, and sometimes we'll generally associate that with rusty patch, but you want to make sure you're taking a look at what's happening on the first two abdominal segments. So in this case, with that red belted on the right, on the top there, we're seeing the crescent of yellow hairs, followed by red, whereas on rusty patch, that crescent shape would be the brown rusty color, followed by just a little bit of yellow on the rest of T2. So here's just a couple photos of the red-belted bumblebee. So we can see in both of these images, it's a little bit easier to see the thorax in the photo on the right. There's that round band between the wing bases that sort of looks like an eye shape. And then we are seeing yellow on the first abdominal segment with that little crescent of yellow, then on the second, followed by T2 and T3 and T4 are both that reddish color rather than black as they would be on the rusty patch.
And just another note on the red belted, a lot of times those reddish or orangish hairs are intermixed with black hairs. So it's when you see the rusty patch on the rusty patch, it's consistent. Well, whereas these, besides being in a different spot, they'll be kind of mixed in with different colors of hairs, kind of all mixed in together.
Another bee that is also can be mistaken for rusty patch is Bombus citrinus, or the lemon cuckoo bumblebee, but specifically the males. So the males and the females for this bee have different color patterns, but the males also have a sort of T shape or umbrella or thumbtack shape on the abdomen, or on their thorax, excuse me, but their abdomen is what's different. So their abdominal segments T1, T2, and T3. So the first three are all yellow, which is quite a bit different from the rusty patch. And these bees you are typically just seeing in the late summer.
And just to note that sometimes these males can be very common. So, and you really don't see them until late summer. So a lot of times people aren't used to looking out for them or forget about them by the time it gets to be August and these are showing up. So this is one to just take note of and remember that you're fairly likely to see them in the late summer, especially in the southern part of Minnesota. They also, so this is one of these cuckoo bumblebees, they also have really big heads. So their heads are just a lot thicker than other bumblebees. If you think you might have one, just take a look at what's going on their head.
So here is a photo that's showing the lemon cuckoo bumblebee from the side. So we can see there's some black hairs between the wing bases. It's kind of hard to see exactly what's going on there in this photo, but we can clearly see that the first three abdominal segments all have yellow hairs on them. Similar to some of the other photos, like the photo of that half black bumblebee we saw earlier, especially between the first two abdominal segments. Looks like there might be something going on there. It looks like there might be something dark. So again, you want to keep an eye out for shadows and where the hairs may have just worn off and you're seeing through to the cuticle, because we got to remember that for this bee, there are three segments that are yellow, but on the rusty patch, we would not see that third, we would not see yellow hairs on the third abdominal segment. So that's all we have for you today in terms of rusty patch and rusty patch lookalikes.
We do have another resource that we're going to share that I'll just put into the chat here. So this is a video that we have. It's actually from the Bumblebee ID course that we have, but we've made this one available to you too. So it's just this is a quiz that we created that's just basically, is it a Rusty Patch Bumblebee or not? So we didn't talk about the queens much in this presentation because you're for most of your survey season you're not going to run into them, but they are included in this quiz too, so you can see them and get used to them a bit there. And we are happy to answer questions. So here's one that came up in the chat. What is the best time of day to scout for queens in the spring or fall? Yeah, that's an interesting question. Um, you know, I mean, I've seen them active, at least in the for the spring queens. I think they're active as long as it's warm enough. So even if it's, gets around, like 55 degrees Fahrenheit, there's queens that'll be out flying around as long as it's, light out and kind of meets that minimum temperature. They'll be out. Um, I do think, kind of later in the afternoon they slow down. Some of it depends on kind of what's been going on weather-wise, whether they need to make up for lost time. They'll stay active as long as it's kind of sunny and warm. In the fall, it's a little bit different because they're so they're you mostly see new queens that are coming out in the fall. They go out and forage a bit, and they'll go back to the nest, but they pretty much already have their, they've already built up their fat reserves. They do a little bit of foraging, so you don't in the fall you see them out at flowers, but not as much as they aren't as active as the spring queens are. Um, so I mean, I've seen the queens, same kind of thing. They'll be active, as long as it's warm enough and it's light out. But I would think those fall queens, it's a little bit kind of a shorter time period. I would guess it's probably most of them you're gonna see between like 10 and 4, whereas for those spring queens, they'll be out from dawn to dusk. Any other questions? I can just note that I just saw my first Rusty Patch worker a little bit over a week ago, here around the Twin Cities. So the workers are out now. And you can feel free to unmute or and talk or use the chat for questions. We do, just to note, we do have some resources on, oh, I guess I can stop sharing this if I can find how to do that again. Oh, and we do have another slide of just that the Fish and Wildlife Service does have a lot of resources about Rusty Patch. So there those up to date maps. I mean, I import into those into our Minnesota Bumblebee Atlas maps, but those maps are there. This is actually a picture of the old website. Their website has been updated, but still on the Fish and Wildlife Service website in their Rusty Patch Bumblebee section, they have a lot of information about surveyors and researchers, about kind of guidance for land managers and as well as plant lists. Just lots of information about the Rusty Patch Bumblebee if you're wanting to learn more. We have some resources as well on the Bee Lab website, where we do have we have a couple videos besides the one I shared. We have a video that's just about Queen ID, the Rusty Patch Bumblebee Queen ID, if you want to get into that. We also just have a website, a web page that just goes over those, what Elise covered for the ID, picking them apart from those common species.
Scott, did you have a question?
Oops, you're still muted.
Mute.
I was told not too long ago that the Rusty Patch Queen does not have the rusty patch on her. Is that true?
Yes, that is true. So it's, I mean, the way with all bumblebees, you know, there's always a little bit of variation. Sometimes you might see one that does have a rusty patch, but from what I understand, for the most part, they do not have that rusty patch.
Yeah, mostly they just have those two kind of segments. So I mentioned we do have that video where we go into all those details. If I can multitask, I'll put the link for that in the chat here too. All right, I've got it. All right, so yeah, if you want to get into the details with the queens, we've got that video will help to explain what you need to know for IDing the Rusty Patch queens, which we do. You know, we did not cover them because the queens aren't important. The queens are super important. They're just not seen as much during our typical survey times, but absolutely love to get sightings of them and more information about what's going on with them. Especially if you happen in the fall to see them digging down into the ground, because we still need documentation of their overwintering habitat.
I have a question. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead, Dan.
I remember last year you had specific weekends that we had to do surveys in, and I'm not seeing any kind of those dates this year. Is that still, I mean, is it still pretty open from mid-June to mid-August?
Yeah, so those dates, we call them the Bumblebee Blitz weekends. So it's the dates that we're that all Bumblebee Atlas folks across the country are recommended to do surveys. And I believe the dates are the same as last year. So it's the last weekend of June, last weekend of July, and I think last weekend of August as well. But I'll make a point to get those up on the Facebook page and on the website as well.
All right, I appreciate that. Helps me out. Okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm. So we are at 12:30. So to be respectful of people's time, we can wrap up here. Elaine and I can hang on for another minute or two if anybody else has any last minute questions. But thanks everybody.
Yeah, good luck out there. I hope you know the Atlas in the past has found new locations for Rusty Patch. So most years we've ended up finding a new location. So good luck out there, and hopefully hopefully it'll be a good year for the Rusty Patch, and we'll see them in some new spots.